Welcome back. Now, as I mentioned before the break, we saw visuals of thousands of right-wing Israelis marching through the occupied East Jerusalem to celebrate Israel's occupation of the city in 1967 following the Six-Day War. They made their way through Palestinian neighborhoods chanting "Death to Arabs" and anti-Islamic slogans. Police forces were dispatched in advance as the settlers regularly assaulted and harassed Palestinians in the Muslim quarters. Now, right-wing Israelis also stormed the headquarters of UNRWA in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome from Jerusalem, Ofer Niemann, who's no stranger to us here at Hilaal TV. He's part of an organization called Boycott From Within. Mr. Niemann, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Niemann, I want to say that this is quite a surprise, but it's not a surprise. This has been happening before. The genocide had started in Gaza. But just what happened yesterday was more of a case of rubbing salt into the wounds for any supposed rhetoric of the occupation of Palestine.
Yes, Jerusalem Day was initiated by an Israeli government and a Jerusalem municipality under Labor Party rule, the so-called liberal Zionists, the moderate Zionists. The occupation of Jerusalem in 1967, as well as the other occupied territories, was done by a Labor Party government. And it shows you that across the Zionist spectrum, there are just different shades of ethnocracy and racist thinking. What we've been seeing in the past years is that Jerusalem Day has come more and more under the control of religious parts of Zionism. And in those marches, indeed, as you say, we see them chanting "Death to the Arabs." And they're also trying to connect that to the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of 1948, and call for another Nakba right now in Gaza and perhaps against Palestinians in the West Bank too, and promoting atrocities in Gaza. Furthermore, in two prominent speeches yesterday, both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich delivered extremely hateful speeches. Basically, Netanyahu referring to Palestinians as animals, and Smotrich referring to Palestinians as Amalekites from the Bible, the Amalekites whom we are supposed to eradicate.
I'm going to touch on those speeches, Mr. Niemann, in a bit, especially the one from Itamar Ben-Gvir, which I found quite as racist and as violent as I've ever heard him speak before, but I'm going to touch on that in a bit. Mr. Niemann, am I correct in saying that if these settlers and these right-wing groups, if they had weapons on them, I mean, it could have turned out ugly, didn't it? I'm quite surprised that they didn't have actual weapons on them, because the way they took this march, the way they acted, the rhetoric spelt something of, well, if we had weapons with us, we would kill anything that came in our way, which is not right-wing, which was not Zionist.
Well, I mean, they do have weapons with them. They have the IDF, the Israeli military. The Israeli military is committing a genocide in Gaza. And once again, pretty much the entire Zionist spectrum has been supportive in one way or another of this genocide. Now, there is some disagreement. Some liberal Zionists are moving away from supporting the genocide. But the most lethal and genocidal and violent force of Zionism is the Israeli military. So they have the military, and the military, to a large extent, at least the ground forces, is under political control of far-right figures. The reason why we didn't see them committing mass massacres yesterday was simply that it's not politically expedient for Israel. For Israel right now, Israel would like to put some sort of lid on the situation in East Jerusalem to pursue ethnic cleansing, driving out the Palestinians from East Jerusalem more slowly. Israel cannot afford politically to commit massacres in Jerusalem, but Israel does have a very racist project for Jerusalem, driving out as many Palestinians as possible, especially around Al-Aqsa, the mosque with a plan supported by quite a few Israelis of eventually demolishing, blowing up the mosque and rebuilding the Jewish temple.
And that's it, because yesterday we saw them storming the Aqsa compound, but it's the speech of Itamar Ben-Gvir. And I listened to it, and I just thought of the process of how the right-wing part of this Israeli government operates. Because it's quite clear he emphasized the need for this greater Israel. He emphasized on the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza. But most importantly, he emphasized on making sure that any talks of a ceasefire, any talks, and this is happening hours before the report came of a US-Hamas potential deal that could occur. They want this to continue. There's no two ways about it. When you listen to his speech and you take the one that came from Bezalel Smotrich and even Benjamin Netanyahu, they are adamant. This ethnic cleansing has to continue, and it's not going to stop in Gaza. It's going to continue throughout parts of the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, it's true. Even Netanyahu, and now he's saying it clearly. One of the conditions he's now setting is that so-called Trump plan for Gaza, ethnic cleansing of all the Palestinian inhabitants, must be carried out. And we are now at a very critical point regarding the whole history of Zionism here. The silver lining, perhaps, I mean, hard to say that to use the term in the context of a genocide, but the silver lining is it doesn't seem that Israel has the political, perhaps not even the military force to have its way. If Israel gets away with it and manages to implement ethnic cleansing in Gaza, we're going to see the far-right elements in Israel consolidating their hold on politics. But if Israel fails in Gaza, and that's what people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are afraid of, and also Netanyahu, including calculations as to his own political and personal survival here, if Israel fails in Gaza, everything is on the agenda, including a discussion of Zionism as a whole. This is a critical time, and if we manage to push back against Zionist expansionism and genocide, we do stand a chance of, sort of perhaps changing history, stopping Zionism not just in Gaza and trying to change this dire situation here.
Mr. Niemann, I just want to get one question through to you before we wrap this up. Of course, you saw the report last night. The sources were, of course, telling Qatari broadcaster Al Jazeera that seems to be falling off slightly from the United States part. But for the families of the hostages, they're getting impatient, aren't they? And if the ceasefire deal doesn't go through, from within Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu himself is going to be under increased pressure, isn't he? Because every single day there are protests that are happening in the streets of Tel Aviv. So it's within the interest of Israel, well, in the interest of Benjamin Netanyahu, to, if he wants to paint himself as some sort of good guy, which is probably thrown out of the window, that they agree to a ceasefire, whether it's coming from the United States of America. But from the family's part, that pressure is going to continue, isn't it, for them to have the captives being released?
True, but overall, Netanyahu has no strong incentive to end the war. If the war ends, he's likely to fall. He's going to face corruption charges and be more vulnerable, including arrest warrants. And the families don't have the political power through their protests to really scare him. The only thing that can really, really change things here is mass refusal. And we're still not seeing that. We're seeing too many liberals who may be in favor of a deal, but they're willing to serve in the Israeli military. And they're just perpetuating Netanyahu's rule here.
Mr. Niemann, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's Ofer Niemann. He's from an organization called Boycott From Within, coming to us from Jerusalem, of course. The scenes where we saw yesterday the far-right Israeli movement going ahead and marking this day of occupation that occurred in the 1967 Six-Day War. They entered the Aqsa compound. That just rubs more salt into the wounds of that genocide that is occurring in Gaza and the mass displacement that is also happening in the occupied West Bank. Well, that's all we have for you here on News in Focus. Tomorrow is a talking point from myself, Ross Patel, the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.